To be American means to be Protestant, white, of native-born ancestry. And the minute that it appears as though something has been taken away from that group of people, and this always sort of is the way that political distress is interpreted, that suddenly it is all right to sort of politically mobilize hate speech, language of othering, and language of outsider, of sort of treating people as outsiders. That also, its ultimate endpoint kind of calls for any form of exclusion to racial violence. This is not a movement that is related to past movements like the Ku Klux Klan or like the American Nazi Party or to other xenophobic movements. It is its inheritor. It is absolutely a continuation of that movement. There is very little rhetorical difference between what the alt-right is saying and the very movements even of the 19th century to restrict the number of Catholics brought into the United States on the basis of the fact that Catholics were eternal outsiders. Catholics could never be loyal to the United States and to the church, and that Catholics were predominantly of the darker races of Ireland and of southern Italy. Because racialized language is something that is moved about often as a political convenience. Any language of separation is really more a political convenience than a political reality. Thank you. I would also say that although the alt-right is small in numbers and a fringe group, and I don't see that even in the aftermath of the Obama era, which is a lot of what I think it's reacting to, is kind of, this is the backlash. That these small numbers were able, in states where Trump won by very small margins, and it only takes a small margin in any given state to get those electoral votes, that the activism of the alt-right, because they're small but they're vocal, was enough to turn those states. So does it matter? Absolutely yes. With our electoral system the way that it is, it matters, and I think we're going to continue to see how it matters. I want to leave it there and give my fellow panelists a chance to continue.
I'll stand up too, I guess. Thank you, Dr. Pryor. That was awesome. So I'm going to talk about the alt-right a little bit from the perspective I have as a young person and a student today here at Creighton. So the alt-right is right of the traditional conservative party. As Dr. Pryor said, these are not people who are conservatives or Republicans. They don't represent the right wing. They are right of that. And their main platform, or what they advocate for, is they do not believe in political correctness. However, they have equated things like hate speech to being not politically correct, if that makes sense. So they're saying that we can say whatever we want because we don't believe in political correctness. Now, the alt-right has been around before Donald Trump, as hard as it is to believe it actually has been around before that. But Trump's rhetoric has given them a platform, a vehicle of acceptance into the public eye. And this can be evidenced by Trump's hate speech himself, whether it's mocking a disabled reporter, bragging about sexually assaulting women, proposing a Muslim ban, or calling Mexicans criminals and rapists. And additionally, in his heavy support of Steve Bannon in hiring him on his campaign and also bringing him into the political cabinet. Trump saying those things and being the president makes the alt-right believe that they have their specific role in American society as well. I am also a history major, so I want to talk a little bit about the historical context and what we can do to kind of use American history to better educate ourselves about what the alt-right is and what it can do in our society today. So the alt-right is a new and somewhat innovative way of mobilizing hateful rhetoric, because in the video they communicate very effectively in ways that we don't necessarily see. Things like hidden subreddits and 4chan. Those parts of communication are actually fall under the blanket of the deep web. It's not Facebook. It's not they're posting statuses like, "Hey, we're neo-Nazis." That's what's happening. They're communicating with each other and feeding off each other in different parts of the internet that can be really, really hard for the average person to find. And so I think that it's kind of going off of Dr. Fryer's point of how these groups are a continuation of things like the KKK and the American Nazi Party is, we have to sit back and look at ourselves and how do we think of the KKK? Pretty awful, right? We know a lot of things now, but how do people in the 50s look at the KKK? Definitely different now. It was definitely okay it was celebrated to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1950s, well before that, and then even today. And to kind of finish up, I want to address the young people in this room, and specifically because we have to be very, very critical of the news that we consume. And we need to understand what we read and where it originates, because I know I get all of my news online. I don't, like, what's a newspaper? I don't know. And so, that doesn't mean that I don't read the New York Times, I just don't physically.
That's why we equated that. There is.
Yeah, there's a difference, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah. But things like Breitbart is not news. That's just incorrect. But things like Facebook groups of platforms like Occupy Democrats, that's also not necessarily news. So you have to separate things like blogs and commentaries that are presented as news from that. So things like Vice, Huffington Post, and BuzzFeed will have a lot of really great news articles, but then they'll have a lot of opinion articles and things like Vice has like different platforms like feminism and things like music, but those aren't necessarily news. So we have to really be critical of ourselves and what we're consuming and understand what is and what is not news, because that's how things like Breitbart can propel themselves forward in our society, is people taking these hateful things of birth control makes women uglier and unattractive and dumber, I don't know. And crazy, yeah, and just and say, oh, okay, that's true, and I can believe that now because the internet told me so. That's actually not necessarily how it works. So I really hope that we can kind of be critical of ourselves and be critical of this movement too. I know that I try to be, it's very hard for me to be respectful of different worldviews, and I don't necessarily think that the alt-right is a worldview that deserves our respect. I think it deserves our criticism and our call to action against it. So, thank you.
I have slides because I'm a word person, so I'm Carol Zugner, as Amanda introduced me. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, certainly carrying off what Etienne started talking about, is the ability of new forms of media for information like the alt-right to gain traction and to gain stability. And one of the things I want to talk about is even how news media refer to the alt-right. The alt-right itself, that title, makes it not seem that bad, right? It's the alt-right, so, oh. And the ability of that kind of thing. So news organizations, particularly newspapers, NPR as well, television stations probably not as much because of just the time and space limits, often have strictures on this is how you refer to them. They send it out in style. All of my students have had to learn AP style. It's how you refer to things. It's how you do things. And so I'm going to look at some different styles, and it's actually your word, from different news organizations. The other thing I want to talk about is, from Etienne, is to talk about how I think what has helped organizations like the alt-right prosper is that because of social media and ways to communicate, whether the deep web or Breitbart News or other things, that they can communicate in what was maybe a pocket of someone feeling resentful or someone thinking, oh, here's all these other people who think like me. This has worked to freedom's advantage in, say, Egypt and in the Arab Spring, but it is also can work to bring people together in ways that perhaps are not as good as I think the Arab Spring was. So that's just something to think about. So I'm going to look at So who gets to decide what we call something? In journalism, oftentimes we say we should let the groups say who they are. The groups get to define it. But this is can be very political. We've seen it in, certainly probably one of the best examples is in referring to abortion terms, where many people call it pro-choice, and AP style it's anti-abortion, pro-life, anti-abortion, and pro-choice. Because the feeling is most people aren't pro-abortion, but they're just trying to make it as non-political as possible. All language is political, right? All language has meaning. Where my communications is people, Ritter people. All language, the minute we put a label on something, it changes. It makes it something maybe that it's not. So journalists try and use ethical standards accuracy to try and tell it as closely as it is to what it should be, instead of using a euphemism to describe something. But what happens is a label like alt-right can kind of normalize this unacceptable behavior. And when we look at something, alt-right just doesn't sound that bad. And then we have all these clean-cut, successful-looking people who espouse these kinds of things. They aren't crazy people in hats and capes. They're the alt-right, so maybe it's okay. So it all kind of, and then you see the pictures and the stuff, and until they do the Nazi salute, they don't look that bad, right? And so you kind of, it normalizes that behavior. So this is the alt-right, and I think we heard that in the film. This is their definition of what they are. This is Richard Spencer. Independent organization dedicated to the heritage, identity, and future of people of European descent in the United States and around the world. Well, that sounds pretty innocuous, right? You know, do they study genealogy? What exactly do they do? We saw in the film, the guy did, that this is